The experiment didn't work. Not only was the racing just as processional as normal, but because of the two pit stop thing, there was so much slowing down of the cars behind you in order to try to get your advantage when you eventually came in for your pit stop, that it was just unbelievably boring. To me, this was one of the worst Monaco Grand Prix that have ever been held, and a classic example of trying to tamper with something that isn't right and fixing it the wrong way. Because these cars, the current 2025 Grand Prix cars, we'll put the 26 cars to one side because there's a little bit of an effort to try and make them a little bit smaller, I think, but I don't think it's going to happen. These cars are definitely completely out of sync with a circuit like Monte Carlo. There's been a lot of talk over the years about we should get rid of Monte Carlo from the calendar because the racing is non-existent. I've always said that's nonsense, because Monte Carlo justifies its existence because it's the shop window of Formula One, and all the beautiful people come to Monaco to spend their money, and in future to spend money in Formula One as well, probably along the way. And playing with it the way they have and did with the two pit stop thing was just complete nonsense. Okay, from the bat, let me just say, delighted for Lando Norris that he managed to pull it off from the pole and win the Monaco Grand Prix. He's back where he should be in the 2025 season. Obviously, he's lost a lot of points to Oscar Piastri going in, and it's going to be fascinating, as I said yesterday, to see how they get on in Spain next weekend. Oscar Piastri, in what was obviously the winning car of the weekend, the McLaren, could only finish third, beaten by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, basically the grid order, but Charles driving the skin off that Ferrari. Well, I say the skin off that Ferrari, doing everything he could within the realms of not getting too close to Lando, because of course it was going to overheat the tyres. He was on mediums towards the end. Lando was on hard tyres. But nevertheless, putting quite a lot of pressure on him, to the point where Lando actually said at one point, "Where's Oscar? We need him behind Charles to distract him and put a bit of pressure on him." So yeah, Charles drove a beautiful race. I think got the absolute maximum from that car, and soundly beat his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who finished only fifth, a long way behind in the other Ferrari. The grid order, basically. And Max Verstappen was fourth, where he started as well. So the two pit stops did not change anything around. All it did was make some aspects of the field and the grid and the lap unbelievably slow. And it was never better demonstrated in the early laps of the race, after a virtual safety car period had come out because Bortoletto had gone off and then rejoined. But it's never better shown when the virtual safety car went in. It was lap 7. Oliver Behrman had just come in for a new set of tyres, and he did a 15.5 at that point, at the restart, first lap after the restart, when Lando Norris, in the lead of the race, was doing 18s. Of course, he was thinking, I'm leading the race, slow things down. That's not unusual at Monaco. We've seen a lot of that in the past. The problem was the two pit stop thing magnified that throughout the race, multiplied it, if you like, is probably a better word. And so we had, in midfield, we had sometimes Isack Hadjar doing 19s. I mean, it was just because he'd come in early to get his two pit stops out of the way early on. He drove very well. But 19s mid-race, I mean, this was like a boring Le Mans 24 hours for me. No element of Grand Prix racing in it really at all. And we know there's never going to be any overtaking at Monaco, but why not at least leave some of the other things, like can you do a long stint and get the tyres to last? Time management means something. In this race, because of the two pit stops, time management went out of the window as well. There was no skill involved at all. And at the end of the race, of course, none of the drivers had any sweat on their heads. It was just like a country drive in the park, except you couldn't do any overtaking. So for me, it actually comes down to two very funny things. One was George Russell, who was obviously annoyed and being held up massively by his mate. Actually, I thought they were really good mates, Alex Albon. I'm sure they're not anymore. But Albon going unbelievably slowly in the Williams, sort of 4 seconds off the pace, 3 seconds off the pace, and then suddenly doing a reasonably quick lap. And George behind him getting more and more frustrated. I mean, it was all meaningless anyway, because they were nowhere really, just right at 8th, 9th, 10th, something like that. And at one point he just went past him. He just straight lined the chicane in frustration, I think, and just passed him and stayed in front and got a 5-second penalty. And one point his radio said, "Oh, George, you better give the position back." And George said, "No, I'll take the penalty. Wait and see what the penalty is. I'll take the penalty because I'm too frustrated to sit behind him. He's too erratic." And I thought that was quite good, actually. I think that was that just about summed up the race. It was absolutely ludicrous. And Kimi Antonelli actually did a similar thing later on. I think it was with Carlos Sainz this time at the chicane, but then did give the position back because he's a rookie, isn't he? He's not as funny as George when it comes to that. But I'm 100% behind George and his sentiment in that race. Later on, they started trying to give him some instructions and saying this was happening. He said, look, I don't want to talk anymore. Just don't trouble me. Because obviously he's just completely and utterly fed up. Not just the performance of the Mercedes. It wasn't that. It was just the ridiculous way the race unfolded. Anyway, getting back to that battle, when Max was in front and he got track position because he didn't make that second pit stop until right at the end of the race, but he was on average, I don't know, second a lap slower than the McLarens, probably maybe slightly less than that, but not quick today compared with how good Lando was, particularly in the McLaren. But it was quite funny because when Lando caught him, which he did quite easily on newer tyres, Max then just drove around in the low 16s, high 15s, and all Lando could do was drop away a little bit so he didn't damage his tyres too much. And it was quite obvious that what Max was doing was just trying to drive as slowly as he possibly could without Lando passing him, so that he gave maximum opportunity for Charles Leclerc to win the race. So Charles then sitting on Lando's tail. They're both sort of a second off their own pace. But of course, there's nothing he can do. He's just waiting for Lando to make a mistake, if any. And at one point, wishful thinking, I think, Charles got on the radio to say, oh, he's making lots and lots of mistakes now, hoping maybe that would go down to the McLaren pit. But he wasn't making that many mistakes. He was making a few tiny ones, but he was driving so within himself. I mean, there was a second off the pace, as I say. So Max was doing, I imagine, all he could to try and give Charles to win that race. Not necessarily to help Charles and be anti-Lewis, but in terms of the championship, it would be better. Obviously, his main rivals are going to be the McLaren drivers and not Charles. That's what he was thinking. So it was quite clever thinking by Max. But yeah, it didn't pay off in the end. And of course, staying out as long as he did, I suppose you could say there was more chance he was going to get the benefit of maybe a safety car or a VSC. But that didn't happen either. Everyone was going so slowly that nobody really made any mistakes, except Pierre Gasly had a moment caused by a brake failure when he hit the guardrail and, yeah, coming out of the tunnel, a bit spooky. Alpine had a terrible weekend, absolutely abysmal. And that damage on the Gasly car won't have pleased them because they've already had so many shunts already with Colapinto and, of course, the big one with Jack Doohan. And now Pierre's had that one. It looked like a tub. It could have been a tub on that one, I think. And Colapinto, for his part, was in that massive train involving the whole George Russell thing. He eventually finished 13th, but he was pretty inconsequential most of the weekend, obviously under strict instructions not to damage the car anymore because Alpine, I imagine, just can't afford to do any more repairs. So that was that. Really boring. And basically the grid defined the finishing order. Norris, Leclerc, Piastri, Max, Lewis, Isack Hadjar. Esteban Ocon drove really well in the Haas Ferrari, got his 2 pit stops out of the way very quickly. And Liam Lawson, okay, yeah, finished 8th. Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz 9th and 10th in the Williams. George out of the points, obviously Antonelli out of the points as well. Oliver Behrman also drove well, finished 12th. Oh yeah, and it was also a bad weekend for Aston Martin. Even though Alonso did that heroic job in qualifying, he was running pretty well, would have been comfortably in the points, but stopped out on the circuit with a blown Mercedes engine in the Aston Martin. And Lance Stroll was predictably nowhere as ever in all that traffic stuff as well. So not a good weekend for Aston Martin, in front of Adrian Newey, who was there, as I say, all weekend on parade. So, yeah, if I'm sounding jaded, it's not because we've just done 3 videos in a row now. I'm jaded because it wasn't an inspiring race, and it wasn't what we want to see at Monaco even. I mean, at least with the old format, there was some skill attached to extending the stint, or maybe coming in very early and then doing a massively long stint, or doing something like that where it meant something and something added up to a total. You could kind of put 2 and 2 together and get 4 with a bit of time management in the middle. Now, this was just nonsense. Nothing made sense. Well, it all made sense. It made so much predictable sense that there was no racing element to it at all. It was just the grid. They might as well have just given the points out after qualifying. And all that remains is to say that it was great that nobody was injured in any sort of incident in the pit lane. And I think that was more by luck than judgment, because there were no safety cars to bring everybody in at the same time. Had there been, then it would have been a different story, I think. You could say, well, that's often been the case at Monaco, but I think because of the 2-stop element, there would have been much more traffic coming into the pit lane had there been a safety car at a pivotal moment of the race, as distinct from the very early phase when we had it. So not much else to say other than the other funny comment, and I'm glad it was up to Red Bull really to provide some of the entertainment, apart from forgetting to send Max out on a set of tyres to set fastest lap, which went to Lando Norris in the end on his last racing lap when he no longer had a Red Bull in front of him going slowly, and he could actually pull out a little bit of a gap from Charles Leclerc. So rather than cruising as you normally would at the end of the Monaco Grand Prix, he was absolutely on it, setting fastest lap. The other thing, though, was Max complaining mid-race about the sludgy gear change on his car. I don't know whether that got changed. We didn't hear him complain about it anymore, so maybe they were able to do something. I don't know. Press a button here and it'll work better. But he said, oh, my gear changes are as slow as the 1972 Monaco Grand Prix. A wet race won by Jean-Pierre Beltoise. Jean-Pierre's greatest victory. I wonder if that's what Max was thinking about. Maybe even in reading about that race on Saturday night before he went to sleep, reading about Jean-Pierre's great win. The race, he won that for BRM. And the reason he was so good in the wet was because Beltoise had a big motorcycle accident early in his career running. He was very good on bikes. And he never really had a strong, I'm saying his right arm, as a result of that. And one of the few races where he was absolutely 100% competitive was that Monaco Grand Prix 72, because it was wet and there was much less load going through the steering, and it nullified the problem that he always had with his arms. So, yeah, it was interesting that Max thought about that during the race. He's a Jean-Pierre Beltoise fan. Mega. I'm kind of, I'm extrapolating here a little bit, but you got to after a race like that. Good on Max for even mentioning that race. So with that over, that sort of demonstration parade that we had this afternoon, everybody packs up now and rushes to Spain, to Barcelona, a proper racetrack where there will be overtaking. DRS will mean something. And DRS at Monaco was a complete joke, as I've always said. DRS will mean a little bit, though, in Spain for sure. And it's a proper racetrack with some good corners. And it'll be fascinating to see how the Lando Oscar Piastri thing hits the ground now. And also, of course, where Ferrari and Red Bull are relative to McLaren. Bearing in mind, in Spain, there will be new front wing regulations and testing for flexi wings. So in theory, the teams will be appearing with new configurations. Will that change things? We will see next weekend. Before we go, quick word about REC watches. Brilliant timepieces related to Formula One history. I'll finish our little trilogy here with a mention again of the Lotus 98T chassis number 4 watch, which celebrates the car that Ayrton Senna drove in 1986. Didn't win the Monaco Grand Prix, but he did win Detroit that year in the black and gold Lotus Renault, designed by Gérard Ducarouge. So this is a good excuse to have a nice picture of Duca there, because what a guy he was. He was a good friend, very good friend to me. I was a journalist, he was a French designer, but we always had a good chat. Whenever he saw me, he always took time to say hello and tell me what was going on and what mods he had made to the car, whether it be the Ligier, the Alfa, or the Lotus. And it was a great car. It was a very good car. They didn't have great reliability that year, but nonetheless, Ayrton had those 2 wins. The other was in Spanish Grand Prix. And here's a scene from Monaco that year. Pit lane, as I say, changed quite a lot. That's Peter Waugh talking to, and I've got this in there because that's Colin Watts he's talking to, one of the great Formula One mechanics who still does quite a lot of work for Williams in the Heritage Centre, Watty, a guy that I was lucky enough to hire when I was TM at Williams, one of the first mechanics I hired from Team Lotus, and he came to us at Williams, did a great job on the 14 and every car thereafter, and came up with the celebrated phrase that no well-meaning mechanic should be able to do the buttons up on his shirt on a Monday morning. The calluses on your fingers should be so bad that you can't do that. They were the days, weren't they? I think most of the mechanics after this year's Monaco Grand Prix will be able to do the buttons up on their shirts. And why not? Things should get better, shouldn't they? Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, to REC Watches, and to you, the viewer. It's been a lot of fun. See you very soon. Spanish Grand Prix coming up.